Hello, everyone. You're listening to the Paradigm Shifts podcast with your host, Keisha Kruger. I'm an organization development practitioner and executive coach, working with leaders to create positive changes in the workplace using behavioral science. My personal mission? Share science-based tools and leadership insights from the field that you can use in the workplace and beyond. Considering we spend about 3/4 of our lifetime at work, there is incredible science and organizational psychology that could be used to rethink the way we work, lead, and ultimately live. Join me as I speak with thought leaders and business leaders in practice, unpacking light bulb moments for paradigm shifts. Hey everyone, on this week's episode, we talk with Dr. John Bennett, who is the president of Lawton Associates, a consulting firm that specializes in helping individuals, teams, and organizations prepare for, excel through, and learn from change by providing consulting, executive coaching, training, and facilitation services to clients in the for-profit, not-for-profit, and government sectors. John is a professor of business and behavioral science at the McCall School of Business at Queen's University of Charlotte. And he also holds the Wayland H. Cato Junior Chair of Leadership and teaches graduate courses about coaching, social identities, leadership, and interpersonal and group dynamics. He is the author or co-author of dozens of publications, including the book Coaching for Change. He was named a Charter Fellow in the Lewin Center and a Founding Fellow of the Institute of Coaching, which is affiliated of McLean Hospital, Harvard Medical School. In 2020, he was recognized as one of the top coaches in Charlotte, North Carolina. John earned an MPA degree from the University of North Carolina at Greensboro and an MA and PhD degrees in Human and Organizational Systems from Fielding Graduate University. For more information about how to get connected with John, visit the show notes. Hi, John. How are you?
Well, greetings. I'm terrific. It's great to be with you and to talk with your audience here.
It's fantastic to have you. I have been really curious to dig into this topic around manager as coach.
Yeah.
We're hearing a lot about the role of a coach in the workplace. And as you know, because of your background and your experience, there's a big spectrum of what coaching looks like. Can you share with me a little bit about that?
Well, it certainly is, and coaching has grown. When I started coaching and getting involved with coaches, many people didn't even understand what it meant. And I think our initial images are often about a sports coach standing on the sideline of a football game, screaming and hollering and jumping up and down. And I think if we notice professional coaches these days, many of them are relatively calm on the field because their work has been done for the most part prior to the game. And I think when we think about coaching in the workplace, there are so many roles that we see coaching show up. And one of those that's often referred to as executive coach or external coach is a person who works from the outside, usually employed by the employer, by the organization, to work with an individual or sometimes with groups to provide coaching services. And we'll talk about what coaching really is and how we define that. There may be internal coaches. Very often organizations will have not only employees who are dedicated to coach their role as being a coach, but also many times HR professionals will develop coaching skills. And for organizations that are into Lean and Six Sigma and those kinds of agile processes, there's a role that's called coach that really is more of what I think of is guiding to get to a particular solution. Whereas what we're talking about is a coach who is helping the person discover for themselves. And we can talk more about that distinction if you want. The other piece, and the one that you're interested in, I think is about the role that managers and leaders can play in coaching employees. And I would propose that all managers who are effective have some degree of coaching that they're already doing.
Mm-hmm.
What we're talking about when we talk about the role of manager as coach is that it's really one of the tools in their toolkit. It's also a role that they can play. It's a skill set that they can use. And they may be at times not playing the role of coach. They may be more of a director. They may be needing to direct the person to do something. Or they may be more in the role of teaching a new employee to do something. And as we think about employees being on a spectrum of performance, The new employee may need some direction and instruction and coaching, and of course, they need feedback. And the person who is a lower performer, we need to give them a lot more guidance as well. And so it may be that we do coach them, but what I want to be careful about is that we don't confuse coaching with coaxing. And
Mm.
so often when I'm working with people to help them develop their coaching skills, they really are coaxing. They're trying to get somebody to get to a solution that they have in mind. And that's not what we're talking about.
So does that mean I'm putting my agenda in the space instead of letting the other individual dictate the agenda? Is that what that
Yeah,
means? Okay.
it's absolutely so. And what I'd suggest is that managers who are paying attention to their employees are knowing that they've hired good people, that they may need some
Mm.
guidance, they may need some direction, but they may need just some help in thinking through how to approach a problem or how to approach a challenge, how to approach an opportunity. And then how do we develop that person so that they don't become so dependent on that manager for the answers? Now, the
Mm.
manager who has the line out their door has probably created dependency. And I use the image sometimes of we've become the crack dealer for the employee. It's not a good image where the employee is so dependent on their manager for the answers that they haven't developed the capacity to solve problems on their own. And I think coaching
Oh.
is a great tool to help managers to let go of some of that desire to have the expertise and to be really the all knowing. Yeah,
So coaching actually helps develop critical thinking capabilities in their employees then,
absolutely. Wouldn't it
and
be
problem
great if,
solving.
yeah, strategic
Mhm.
thinking. There's some research that says that one of the biggest differentiators between an average leader and an exceptional leader is their ability to think and act strategically. So, wouldn't it be great if managers took on the responsibility and the role of helping people to think through their own issues as opposed to thinking for them? And
Mm.
certainly, if we have more of a knowledge economy and as opposed to a task economy, that really becomes more important. That people know how to solve their own issues. In many cases, the manager's not even around. I was talking to somebody recently who said they hadn't seen their manager in over a year. That's probably not a good thing, but the idea that we're spread out and we don't have the time to interact as much is a problem as well. Yeah.
So let's go back to what does a coach mean? What does that look like? Because you had talked a little bit about how it's the processes around kind of providing like a container. You could imply that, right, for the individual. But how would you define coach then?
Yeah. So think about it as both a noun and a verb. So I can coach
Okay.
you, that's the verb, and I can be a coach, which is the noun. And when I am using the skill set of coaching and I'm playing that role, then what I'm doing is helping you to discover. I'm helping you to discover what needs to be worked on. What is the challenge? I tend not to use the wording of what's the problem because then we end up,
Mhm.
as a good friend of mine says, I was a problem solver until I realized I was running around finding problems. Become you begin to see everything as a problem. Instead, I like to think of managers who are being good coaches are helping people to discover what they need to work on, what they need to work on to
Mhm.
learn and grow. How do they need to develop their skill set, their capacity to perform well? What a great thing for managers and leaders to do. Another area that coaches and managers can work on is helping someone to improve their performance. So they're reasonably good performer, or maybe even there's some deficiency in their performance. Is how do we help that employee to develop focus and the attention, and again the capacity to respond to the changes in the workplace and to be able to perform at the level of expectation. And then the
Mm.
third area is what I would call as transition or transformation. And this is where, as leaders and managers, you're helping people to discern perhaps their next career move, perhaps even helping them to discern what it means to move into a new role. So I've recently gotten promoted, and now how do I need to transition my mindset in order to think like that next level. I was just working with a coaching client who's having that kind of challenge, and part of what we're working on is how do you think like you're the next level up? Because when you're communicating with your manager, your boss, and in this case it was the CEO, how do you think like they are? What are the issues they're thinking about? And
Hmm.
unless you've really spent some time on that, you don't just naturally think like the next level or the next level up.
Hmm. So those are the areas that manager as a coach can support utilizing a coaching approach,
Yeah,
correct?
yeah,
So,
yeah.
so what does that look like then? If I am helping an employee with one of those areas, like performance improvement, what is that like
What does it look like?
ground wise, like
Yeah,
grounding
yeah, yeah.
it?
Get real concrete here. So when a manager is using coaching skills, and I would say developing and adopting a coaching mindset. So
Mm,
and part of that is for the manager to let go of the idea that they have to have the answers. We've gotten this framework so often in organizations where leaders are expected to have answers. I would suggest there's a great quote, one of my favorite quotes by a Nobel Prize winner who said, "You can tell a person is intelligent by their answers, but you can tell they're wise by their questions." And so I
mm,
would suggest one of the things that managers can do right off the bat is to ask more questions. Don't feel like you've got to have the answer, but ask questions. Help that person to make some decision, foster their thinking. Another thing that managers who are coaches can do, and it's so critically important to creating a culture in which coaching is accepted and coaching is appreciated, is that you also deliver feedback on a regular basis. What we know is that feedback rich environments lend themselves to more development, where people are getting feedback on a regular basis. And as opposed to what I often hear people say is, when I say, "Would you like some feedback?" or when in their organization, when somebody says, "Would you like some feedback?" the answer is, "No, I don't want to hear any bad news." We immediately think that feedback is bad and there's something wrong, as opposed to developing a growth mindset, as Carol Dweck says,
mm,
instead of a performance mindset, where if we don't perform well, we're failures. What I would say is, when we don't perform well, how can we learn? And so, how do we embrace that? By giving people feedback that is developmental and is reinforcing. I don't like using the phrase constructive feedback because that implies that some of the feedback is destructive.
yeah, right,
May I give you some,
right.
yeah, may I give you some constructive feedback? Well, does that mean some destructive feedback is coming next? And that certainly is
Mm,
not the message. So learning to give feedback is a key part of this. And another part is learning to listen. And this comes back to giving the pause, giving that silence to let people come up with their own answer.
that's
And
scary.
yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
Because guess what? They might not come up with the answer I want them to come up with. And then as the leader, you've got to say, well, what happens if they try it and they don't succeed? Well,
Hmm.
I would say then your job as the leader is to help them process what they learned from it, because that learning, that reflection enables them to be a stronger employee going forward. So we've got listening, we've got feedback, and then the third and then asking powerful questions. And I would add
Mm,
one more piece to how this looks, and that is I think effective coaches, managers who are coaching, help their employees to reframe issues, see things from a different perspective, look at it from a different
mm,
angle, whether that's imagining an issue down the road, 5 years from now, what would that look like? Or, for example, what happens if we take away all the constraints? What would you do? Helping them think
mm.
about possibilities. And that gets them excited. And I think these kinds of things can lead to some positive results in the workplace. Yeah, go ahead, please.
Yeah, so when you're reframing, you can do that in a way that doesn't suggest that you're guiding them to your own agenda, right?
That's
With
right.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if I'm guiding you towards my agenda or my solution, then I'm not helping you think. I'm not helping you see things differently. I'm just convincing you that I had the right answer to start with, and you just hadn't given me enough time to answer it for you.
Mm.
And that's not
Well,
developing capability for your employees. Yeah.
some managers might suggest, well, we want them to come up with this particular solution, or the organization requires us to move in
Yeah.
this direction. So then, is that a different skill that we're applying? We're not applying coaching in that
Yeah.
situation. We might provide guidance or directing
Well,
instead.
what you're describing, I would characterize as being empowered. And I think what
Mm,
you want to do is you want to engage your employees, you want to equip your employees, and you want to empower your employees. And so, as you think about your team members, part of that empowerment also includes boundaries. We're not bound; we don't have unlimited boundaries. Whether it's financial, what's the budget for this, or what's the time constraint, or what human resources can we put onto the project, or any of those
mhm,
kinds of things. They're boundaries. If you're responding to customer needs, you've got the boundaries of what the customer wants. Well, the same thing is true internally when we think about what are those boundaries. And that enables people to know what are the guardrails. If I get on
mhm,
the interstate, at least in the US, if I get on the interstate, I'm required to drive on the right hand side of the road. That's empowerment. I'm empowered to
mhm,
drive on the right hand side of the road. I'm not empowered to drive on the left side of the road. Um, I'm also empowered to drive within a speed limit, a minimum and a maximum. I'm empowered to change lanes, but I need to turn on my direction signals. I'm empowered
mm.
to go, in lots of different ways. And all of that is part of the boundaries. And what I find so often is good managers are the ones who set the boundaries with their employees and they're understood so that we don't have misunderstanding about expectations.
What do you think holds managers back from not setting boundaries effectively?
Probably assuming that people can read their minds and figure it out, or maybe
Mhm,
not being clear about it themselves, or not realizing the power of giving that expectation up front. There's a framework that says that if we don't have expectations clearly defined, we're probably going to be disappointed. And if we're
right.
disappointed, right, we're going to be angry. And if we're angry, we're probably going to have some resentment towards that person. And all of that's kind of a downward spiral. And so it's a little bit upfront that can make a whole lot of difference down the road as managers. Yeah.
Yeah, at some point we get the opportunity to take the initiative, take accountability, right, for the contributions we're making to the team, to the environment, to the development of our employees. I almost feel like it's an obligation if you're in a
Yeah.
manager role
Yeah.
to have contributing, to contribute to your employees' development.
Absolutely. And I think that's part of what makes all of this so important is, there's a lot now being said about the lack of employee engagement. Employee engagement's down. We've seen this post pandemic in particular. People are
Mhm.
dissatisfied in their work environments. I saw something recently that said something like 7 out of 10 employees are struggling to figure this out, that 20% of the workforce, at least 20% of the workforce, is somehow disengaged. They may have
Mm.
quit, but they haven't left yet. And so all of that is contributing to challenges in the workplace, whether those are relationships in the workplace, whether they're performance in the workplace, whether they're growth and development. All of that creates a drag, if you will, in the system. And so,
Mm.
as leaders and managers, I think part of your responsibility is to help bring out the very best in the people that you have. And you say, well, they aren't capable. Well, that says to me you may have made the wrong hiring decision. That's not the
Mm.
employee's fault very often. It's about a hiring decision. Or the work has changed and you need to move that person's skill set to a different part of the organization. But part of this is about how do we help people be their very best so that they can contribute, they'll be fulfilled, they'll be retained. The cost of retention or lack of attrition in the workforce is incredible. The amount
Mm.
of time and money. I was just talking with someone recently who said that they had been trying to fill a position for 6 months. Well,
Wow.
if you've got a vacancy for 6 months, think about all the work that's not getting done. Keep it.
Or the amount of employees that are taking on that work that's not being done by someone and potentially then feeling like they can't find meaning in their job, like that impact, that
That's right.
contagious impact that it
That's
has
right.
outwardly, that ripple out impact.
That's right. Yeah.
Now they feel disengaged, they feel like overwhelmed, they feel burnt out, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. The cascading impacts. And I would
Mm.
say, again, coming back to the role that managers can play as coaches, is how do you have a positive ripple impact? So, how do
Mm.
you turn that into a place where we really move away from that parental role, that kind of controlling role that often we think of managing, which is by nature, by definition, means to control? I think of it
Mm.
as to empower. How do you empower your employees to be their very best? And how do you get out of the way so that they can have the experiences, including the ones that aren't so successful, but you as a manager are helping them process that in a way that teaches their learning, their growing from the experiences that we have? Because if we have the same experience over and over again and produce the same result, then that's, classic sign of insanity. And what we want to do in organizations is not be insane, but to be in a growth mode.
Mm. There's a book, I can't remember. I'm going to be royally screwing this up. I think it's called like like it talks about managers as multipliers. Have you ever
Yeah.
heard of?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, so that role
It's a
that
very good
managers
book.
play is,
Yeah.
yeah, okay. I think that's kind of what similar to what you were talking about is like the contributing power that a manager has being that like front line and that face to face with the employee is
hmm
so powerful.
Well, absolutely. The manager is the front line relationship to that employee. And I would suggest that managers who are effective, leaders who are effective, have vision, have a culture, they have good communication, and they're spending the time on what in most organizations is the single largest operating budget and
Mhm.
line in their operating budget. So if you think about whatever that is, and I've asked many people in various industries, and what I get is it's anywhere from 40 to 80% of our operating budget is people.
Oof.
And even if it's on the low end of 40% of an organization's operating budget, that's a lot of money. So what are you doing to invest in the people who make everything else happen? And I think the manager gets so caught up in doing task that we forget about the people part. And it's only with the people that the tasks get done.
Mm. There's a role at a firm that and it's similar across other organizations, a project manager, right? And so I've worked with project managers and I've explained to them that despite your title saying that you're a project manager, it's kind of misleading. You're missing half of the formula. The other half of the formula is you're a people manager.
That's
And
right.
trying to institute that into their belief system as well is really important because to your point, we focus so much on tasks, we focus so much on
Mhm.
getting things done and those productivity outputs that we forget that people are the ones making things happen at the end of the
Yeah,
day. So
absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
so what happens if a manager says to you, well, this is just going to take more time. Coaching takes a lot of time. This is going to be a waste of my time, or maybe not even a waste of my time. It's just time consuming. I don't
Right.
have enough time on my plate. This is going to add additional 15 minutes or 30 minutes every single week. What is your typical response to those reactions?
Well, I hear that sometimes, and I've had the good fortune of teaching hundreds, if not thousands, of people coaching skills at this point. And and many of them are in managerial and leadership roles. And when I get that, here's my response, and I think this is true. I've actually made this promise, and I've never had anybody come back and cash it in. And the promise I make is that if you do what I teach you to do and use coaching skills, the line out your door will shorten. And if it
Hmm.
doesn't, I'll take you to dinner at the finest restaurant that we can find. And I've never had
Ooh.
anybody come back to me. Now I'll say that on here, and somebody will try this, and it won't work. And okay, one in a million.
For anyone listening, I'm putting John's email in the show notes in case you want.
Very good. But the point being that, I don't think you have time not to use coaching skills. I think, most of us want to be heard. So let's start with just listening. Who doesn't want somebody to truly listen? And I don't mean multitasking while you're talking. I mean paying real attention and then having a degree of curiosity, that asking questions. And so often we aren't curious. We make assumptions and we jump to conclusions, and we don't have to have people finish the sentence. But truly be curious. What are you telling me? What are you not telling me? What am I hearing? What am I not hearing? What are you thinking? What are you feeling? How are you acting? Be curious. Then, if you've got people who are listening and truly asking questions, you already are feeling more valued. And if you feel more valued, then you're more likely to contribute to what's going on. And you're more
Yeah.
likely to want to be engaged in what's going on. And you're probably going to feel a stronger connection to that manager in that organization, in that mission or that purpose or the profit line that you're about, in a way that would say, hey, I'm important and I'm valued and somebody cares about me and somebody's trying to help me learn and grow.
Mm. Yeah, it feels more proactive than reactive, right? Because that line of thinking suggests that productivity will naturally grow or naturally go up. Performance will naturally improve as a result of or a byproduct of us focusing on the engagement, on developing the employee. So
Yeah.
it seems that like you hit on benefits that not only the managers would gain from this with the shortened line for out their door, but also organizations. And you think about that's just one individual, but if you had all of your managers doing the coaching or applying coaching skills, the huge cascading ripple out effect to an organization would be just incredible,
Yeah.
right?
Absolutely. And if you take that up in the organization, and not to imply that this is something that only frontline managers do, but if you think about
Yes.
executives doing
Oof.
this, and what we know is that cascading of just being good feedback givers and
Mm.
feedback recipients will have a cascading impact. So there is some research that would say that tells us that people who are more receptive to feedback are more likely to give effective feedback. And what
Mm.
we know is that giving feedback is the foundation for giving coaching to coach somebody. So if you're not telling your employees what they're doing well, what you're noticing, what you're paying attention to, and how they can learn and grow and develop, then you're probably not going to be able to have a conversation about possibilities for new approaches. But if you start with asking them, what feedback would you give me? And in return, I'm willing to give you feedback. You've just created a safe place. And even to go further, a brave space for people to talk about what's going on, what they're experiencing, what they need, how they're growing, what their vulnerabilities are, and then be able to work together in partnership to grow that
Mm.
potential. Yeah.
Yeah, I was speaking about this with on I think it was episode 4 that I think it was Michael Dietrich Chastain. We were talking about the species that live the longest or survive the longest are the ones that institute the most feedback loops.
Mm-hmm.
And humans have the ability to do that in every domain that you can
Yeah,
possibly
that's
think
right.
about,
That's right.
right? So the value of having feedback skills is as a foundation to be an effective coach is critical. Are there other capabilities that would make you an effective coach?
Yeah. Well, let me stay with the feedback for just a minute, because I think
Yeah.
one part of that is that if you think as a leader and a manager, you're giving feedback by just not saying something to somebody. You are
Mm.
giving feedback. The question is, how is it being interpreted? And so what I would suggest is developing that capability to very clearly, and here's a tip, Keisha, for how to give feedback very easily, is think about it as four pieces. One of those is, what's the context in which I observed the behavior? In the meeting yesterday, I noticed, or whatever. And then what is the behavior? If you're talking
Mm.
about behavior, that's concrete. And you're not going to get in trouble. You're not going to get into legal issues. And it's grounded. So it's hard to argue with behaviors that you observed. I noticed you did X, Y, or Z, or I noticed you didn't do X, Y, or Z. And then the third piece is, well, what is it that what was the impact of that? So as a result of that behavior, something happened or something didn't happen. Helping people become aware of that. And then the fourth piece is to make a request. What is it that you would hope that person would do? Either start something, stop something, continue something, change something, whatever, and make that
Mm.
as a real request. And if you get that agreement, then what you've gotten is a clarity about what that behavior was, its impact, and then what could be done going forward. That to me is a real starting point. Yeah.
So that's the SBI model, right?
I call it CBIR.
Similar.
Yeah, CBIR.
CBIR. Okay.
Context, behavior, impact, and request.
I love following this model. The question I have for you on this, though, is after you describe impact, is there space between the requests?
Yes. I think there's space in between every one of those steps. So let's get
Mm,
agreement.
okay.
Let's remember that circumstance. Another example that I've recently had is where a manager thought they were giving feedback to one of my external coaching clients, and my external coaching client didn't get it at all. Didn't even hear it. Part of that was because it wasn't clear, it wasn't in the context, it wasn't timely, but it was also not behaviorally anchored.
Mm,
And so if you go through each of those steps and make sure that we have common understanding about what we're talking about, then when you get to the request, what I find is often the person that's receiving the feedback will say, I know what I need to do. And you don't even
mm.
have to make the request. What a
It's so
great thing.
clear.
It's so clear. Yeah,
Yeah.
I can see where my behavior didn't get the results I was hoping for. And now I need to make some adjustments. And as managers, if you can do that, you're well on your way to coaching, which is in
Mm.
essence helping them to discover for themselves what they need to work on.
In that space where you're checking for understanding in between is, I mean, active listening essentially, or a part of active listening, right? And that is a capability of coaching. So you're essentially
Mhm,
coaching in your
mhm.
feedback
That's right.
loops.
It's
Okay.
often the starting point because what we're trying to do is Mary Wayne Bush and I wrote a book called Coaching for Change. We published
Oh,
in,
oh, oh, oh,
you
oh.
up. You're going to hold it up. All right, great. Uh, so
That's
one of the things that we
earmarked.
worked on in there was to think about a mastery model. So what we're trying to do is, as managers, is you're trying to help someone get to a point of mastery. And mastery is, as I would define it, is that ability to do things effortlessly. But at the same time, our ability to respond when we don't know what to do, where we're able to take some experience and apply it in a different way. We call that
Mm,
learning agility as
learning.
well. And that idea of not only making it effortless, but being able to learn from the experiences, being able to improvise, and being able to deconstruct and reflect on our behavior. So, if we want to get our employees to that point, then how do we get there? And it starts with awareness. And so that's the feedback part. Then it doesn't stop with the feedback there, but we also want to get agreement and acceptance of that feedback in order for the individual to adopt a new behavior. And if we know any of us who've tried to change a behavior, you don't do it right the first time, you don't do it consistently. And so you begin to kind of try it, you experiment with it, you begin to adopt that behavior, and you need feedback even in that step.
Mm,
Then you move to a place where it becomes integrated in how you show up. It's more of that muscle memory that athletes talk about. It becomes the natural way of doing things. And it doesn't mean we'll get it perfect every time, but we're on our
right.
way. And feedback again becomes so critically important. And then we can get to a developmental stage that we would call mastery. And even at mastery, you're getting feedback. You get it from yourself, perhaps more than you get it from others, but you're able to realize what's going on. And I think that's what we want our employees to do. And managers who are coaching have that growth mindset, that mastery development mindset, that feedback skill, that listening skill, that reframing, and all that's involved in helping to discover. Yeah.
It's huge. It's so huge. One of the things I wanted to talk with you real quick about was check for understanding and the importance of that. If you're not assuming a positive intent, then wouldn't that suggest that you're limiting the reaction response that could potentially come from that individual? We've known each other. I've been in your classes before. You've been my
Mm-hmm.
professor, but you've talked before about ladder of inference and making
Mm-hmm.
inferences. And I think this is such a critical thing for all managers to understand. Can you talk to me a little bit about that?
Well, ladder of inference was developed really by Chris Argyris, and the notion here is that we have experiences and we observe things, we experience things, and we filter it. We all have our
Mm,
filters. There are biases, there are preferences, they are what we know, our frames of reference. And then we tend to make assumptions, and in making assumptions, we sometimes ignore what the facts are. And if we are doing a good job of testing assumptions, we're asking questions. That's the antidote for an assumption. And that's also a break point in this climbing up a ladder of inference, which says that we infer then what the meaning is. We reach a conclusion, and then we take an action. And most of us do that in about a nanosecond, right? So we just
right.
jump right up. And so part of what we can do in the coaching relationship, managers can do is help people to identify and test assumptions. And
Mm,
that's a key piece here. And I even say to people, you're going into a meeting or you're meeting somebody for the first time or you're working on a team, start with what are your assumptions? And then you can test those assumptions and you won't jump into making false conclusions and taking action that you regret later. Yeah.
oh, what a cool process to add before like a performance review. Like, what
Yeah.
assumptions am I making about this employee's performance over the last year? And how you can kind of challenge even biases that we might
Yep.
encounter as
Yeah.
human beings often will and continue to do because we're human.
Yeah. Not only what are my assumptions about their performance, but what are my assumptions about what's driving them?
Mm,
What are their motivations? And
sure.
I'll come back to the feedback piece. A good feedback is not only in that CBIR approach, but it's also focused on what's important to the person that's receiving the feedback. So if you want to be a good manager who's coaching, has a coaching approach, I would suggest one of the first things you do is sit down with each of your employees and have an honest conversation about what your motivations are. What is it that
Mm,
drives them? And by driving them, it may be money, it may be achievement, it might be something to do with their relationships, or it could be just I'm coasting along here, or it may be that I
Is
want to
that
learn and grow. Right?
is that how you
And
would ask it? What drives you? Like
what
what's a good question for that?
Yeah, what drives you? What gets you up in the morning? What keeps you
Mm,
going? What keeps you going when things are not going so easily? What keeps you
mm,
going when things are going relatively smoothly? And so, with those in mind, then as a manager, you can tailor the feedback to the individual recipient. And we often think there's a formula that says there's one way to give feedback. No, it has to
mhm.
be tailored to what that employee wants. And then it'll be much more easily accepted and well received if we have that in mind. Yeah.
And it might even support not accelerate, yeah, expediting the behavioral change part of it, right? Because like you said, we'll not get it right every single time, but if you are tailoring it to what's important, what's driving them,
Right.
then might be more likely to hear the feedback, to interpret, to receive it, to have it
Yeah.
resonate with them, and then to make that active choice to do something different.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Because then it's about what's important to them, not just about what's important to me. That's into the telling and the coaxing. Go back to that piece. I'm trying to get you to my answer. What's important to me? Well, what's important to you?
Mm,
That's what gets you up in the morning. Yeah.
huge. So, can anyone be a coach as a manager or leader in the organization, the workplace?
I think we can teach coaching skills to anyone. Now, the question is how well you perform those isn't, that could be debated. Part of that is what
Hmm.
your commitment. But if you come in with an open mindset, if you come in with the idea of why I'm developing others, and that I can give up the notion of having the answers or that I have to be persuasive. I think that's the other piece is that, being curious is different from being persuasive. And sometimes I've worked with people who ask great questions, but they do it from the perspective of, I'm going to ask questions and get you to come up with my answer. And that's not a real curiosity.
No.
You may have a well constructed question, but your motive, your driver, and what your intent is are off base. So yeah, I think people can learn to be coaches. I think many managers can learn to be excellent coaches, and I think every manager should be a coach.
Hmm. Yeah, you imply that in your recent article, Seeking Input Managers Coach. You say you make the argument that the role of a coach should play in the workplace, and I agree with you 100%. And I would love to see more managers as coaches. So, do you have any work coming up about teaching or sharing tips or practical best
Yeah.
practices that you
So
can share?
a couple of things. One, thanks for asking. So I do a blog from time to time. I'm probably not as um, disciplined about doing those on a regular schedule, but I try to be inspired by what's going on, and I'll write a blog post. So I have that on my website, and I don't know if you want me to share that or if you'll put that in the
Sure.
material.
Yes. I will
Yeah.
put it in the show notes and share it.
All right, very good. At lawtonassociates.com, lawton-associates.com, and we'll have blog posts there. The other is that I'm very fortunate that I've got a book that will be coming out that's scheduled for 2024. It seems like at this moment a long time away, but the countdown on my calendar says that it's not that far away. So I'm a little
Mm-mm.
little eager to get that done. But the book will be The Manager's Guide to Coaching for Change. And
Oof.
so we'll be talking specifically in that book about what can managers do and the skills that they need, the mindset that they need in order to be effective managers who use a coaching approach in their work, and would encourage that as a resource as well.
Thank you so much for sharing that. Now, staying true to the concept of my podcast, I am going to ask you one final question to kind of wrap us up here today.
All
And the
right.
question is, and put you on the spot a little bit, what is the most recent paradigm shift that you've experienced, whether it's related to this topic or
Mhm.
anything else that you're working on?
Oh, wow. Um, wow, that's a
Just
great
a
question.
small question.
Yeah, it's a great question. I think you've had some education in how to ask good questions. That's a great. I was afraid you were going to go through um, the the um, the list that's used on. I've forgotten the show now, but yeah, I'm begging time here and delaying my response.
I know you're procrastinating to try
I'm
it now.
procrastinating on that. I'm trying to think of my answer. So here's what's coming up for me
Yeah.
is I'm beginning to realize that I'm at a different stage in my life,
Mm,
personally. So a shift for me is, what does it mean to embrace my current age? And what does that
okay.
mean in terms of relationships? What does that mean in terms of my relationship to work? What does that mean in
Mm,
my relationship to the people I love around me? And I've recently read a book, Stage Not Age, which is a wonderful piece by a Stanford professor who is written about what happens to us in our lives. And it's not the age that we're in, but it's the stage of our lives. And I love that concept. And I think the shift for me is just beginning to realize that some of the things that were perhaps very important to me 20 or 30 years ago are not that important, but they were at the time. And I'm not in any way criticizing myself for what was important then, but I'm excited about where I am now and beginning to think about, well, what does a new future look like? And
mhm.
that's a shift. That's a paradigmatic shift for me. Yeah.
I'm excited for you. I think everyone should have those opportunities of reflection and at different phases of their life reevaluate what their relationship to different parts of their life is. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you also for helping shift some paradigms today with this topic around the role of being a manager as a coach.
Very good.
Thank
Keisha,
you.
thank you for inviting me and letting me share some thoughts.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for tuning into this week's episode. If you enjoyed this conversation, don't forget to leave a review, rate, and subscribe wherever you're listening. If you know a business leader in practice or friend who you think would be interested in this episode, please consider sharing it with them. I am so grateful for your support. For more updates, you can follow us at Paradigm Shifts Podcast on Instagram. See you on the next episode.